2 of the enemy's shots had already been fired at the men as they crossed the river, and on the bridge there was a jam. Halfway across stood Prince Nesvitsky, who had dismounted from his horse and was leaning with his stout body against the parapet. Laughing, he looked back at his Cossack, who stood a short distance behind him holding the bridles of their 2 horses. As soon as Prince Nesvitsky tried to force his way forward, the throng of soldiers and baggage wagons crowded him and forced him up against the parapet, and nothing was left for him but to wait. "Look out there, my boy," cried the Cossack to a soldier who was driving a baggage wagon and forcing his way right into the infantry as they thronged under the horses' feet and among the wheels. "Look out there. Have a little patience. Don't you see the general wants to pass?" But the driver, paying no heed to the title of general, only cried to the soldiers who blocked his way, "Hey there, boys! Keep to the left! Hold on!" But the boys, crowding shoulder to shoulder and locking bayonets, moved on across the bridge in one unbroken mass. As Nesvitsky looked down over the parapet, he could see the swift babbling ripples of the ends chase each other along as they bubbled, curled, and foamed around the piers of the bridge. Looking at the bridge, he saw almost incessant living waves of soldiery, tassels, shaycocks, shakos with covers, knapsacks, bayonets, and muskets, and under the shakos, faces with high cheekbones, sunken cheeks, and careless, weary eyes, and legs trampling through the mud which covered the planks of the bridge. Sometimes among the monotonous waves of the infantry, like a spurt of white foam on the ripples of the river, an officer in riding cloak would force his way through, his face noticeable for its refinement in contrast to the men. Then again, like a chip borne along on the river, a hussar on foot, an officer, a denshchik or civilian, would be carried across the bridge by the tide of troops, and sometimes, like a log floating downstream, an officer's company or baggage wagon loaded to the top and covered with leather would roll across the bridge, submerged in the throng. "See, it's like a freshet breaking through the dike," said the Cossack, hopelessly blocked. "Say, are there many more of you to come?" "1 million, minus 1, replied a jolly soldier in a torn overcoat, winking as he passed. In an instant he was carried by. Behind him came an old soldier. "When he, that is the enemy, takes to making it hot for us on the bridge," said the old soldier glumly, in his Tambov dialect, addressing a comrade, "we shan't stop to scratch ourselves." And the Tambov soldier and his comrade passed beyond. Following them came a soldier riding a baggage wagon. "Where in the devil did I put my leg wrappers?" exclaimed a denshchik, hurrying behind the wagon and rummaging into the rear of it. And he in turn was borne past with the wagon. Behind them came a jovial band of soldiers who had evidently been drinking. "My dear fellow, he hit him with the butt end of his gun, right in the teeth," gaily said one of the soldiers, who wore the collar of his overcoat turned up and was eagerly gesticulating. "Good for him, a regular milksop," said the other with a loud laugh. And they too passed by. So that Nesvitsky did not find out who was struck in the teeth and to whom the epithet applied. "Ugh, they're in such a hurry. Because he fired a blank cartridge one would think they were all in danger of being killed," said a non-commissioned officer, in an angry, reproachful tone. "When it flew by me, that round shot," said a young soldier with a monstrous mouth, "I thought I was dead. Fact! I was that frightened, by God," added the soldier, scarcely restraining himself from laughing outright with pleasure at the thought of being so frightened. And he too passed on. Behind him came a vehicle unlike any that had passed so far. This was a German Vorspann, loaded apparently with the effects of a whole household. Behind the cart, which was drawn by a pair of horses driven by a German, was a handsome brindled cow with an enormous udder. On a pile of feather beds sat a woman with a baby at the breast, an old granny, and a young, healthy-looking German girl, with flaming red cheeks. Evidently, these natives were availing themselves of the general permission to remove with all their permissions. The eyes of the soldiers were fixed upon the women, and as the cart moved forward at a slow pace, step by step, all sorts of remarks were directed at the 2 young women. Almost all the faces wore the peculiar smile suggested by unseemly thoughts concerning them. "Look ye, that sausage there, she's moving too." "Sell me the little woman," cried another soldier to the German, who with downcast eyes walked with long strides, frightened and solemn. "Eh, ain't she gay? They're fine little devils." "There's a chance for you to make up to 'em, Voidodoff." "Did you ever see anything like it, old fellow?" "Where are you going?" asked an infantry officer, who, as he munched an apple, looked up at the pretty German girl with a half-smile. The German shut his eyes, signifying that he did not understand. "If you'd like it, take it," said the officer, giving the girl an apple. She took it and thanked him with a smile. Nesvitsky, like all the rest who were on the bridge, kept his eyes on the women till they vanished from sight. After they had passed beyond, came the same manner of soldiers with the same interchange of repartee, and then at length the train came to a halt. As often happens, the horses attached to some company's baggage wagon became entangled at the end of the bridge, and the whole line were obliged to halt. "What are they waiting for? There's no order," said the soldiers. "Don't crowd. The devil! Why can't you have patience? It will be worse than this when he sets the bridge on fire. You're crushing that officer." Such were the remarks made on all sides among the halting columns, as the men looked at each other and still kept trying to push forward toward the outlet. As Nesvitsky looked under the bridge at the water of the Enns, he suddenly heard a sound that was new in his ears, of something swiftly approaching him, of something huge, and something that splashed into the water. "Did you see where that flew to?" gravely asked a soldier who was standing near and trying to follow the sound. "They are encouraging us to move a little faster," said another uneasily. Again the throng began to move along. Nesvitsky realized that it had been a cannonball. "He, Cossack, bring me my horse," he said. "You there, make way. Get out of the way. Clear the road." By main force he managed to swing himself upon his horse. By shouting constantly, he succeeded in forcing his way forward. The soldiers crowded together so as to let him pass, but immediately after pressed on his heels so that they squeezed his leg, and those who were nearest could not help themselves because they were pushed on from behind. "Nesvitsky! Nesvitsky! Is it you, you old fright?" cried a hoarse voice just behind him. Nesvitsky turned round and saw 20 paces away, but separated from him by this living mass of hurrying infantry, the handsome Vaska Denisov, shaggy as ever, with his cap on the back of his head, and with his hussar's pelisse jauntily flung back over his shoulder. "Tell these devils, these fiends, to give us woom," cried Denisov, going into a paroxysm of rage, his coal-black eyes, with their bloodshot whites, rolling and flashing while he brandished his unsheathed saber, in his bare little hand, as red as his face. "He, Vasya," replied Nesvitsky, delighted. "Is that you?" "Can't get through the squadron," cried Vaska Denisov angrily, showing his shining teeth and spurring on his handsome coal-black Bedouin, which pricked back his ears at the touch of the bayonets, and snorting and scattering around him the froth from his bit, was pawing impatiently on the planks of the bridge, apparently ready to leap over the parapet if only his rider gave the permission. "What does this mean? Like sheep, just like sheep. Out of the way, give us room to pass. Hold on there. You man, driving that wagon. Dwat it, I'll cut you into mincemeat," he cried, actually drawing his saber and beginning to flourish it. The soldiers, with frightened faces, crowded closer together, and Denisov managed to reach Nesvitsky. "So you aren't drunk today?" said Nesvitsky, as Denisov joined him. "They don't give us time to get drunk. replied Vaska. "The regiment has been running this way and that way all day long. If we're going to fight, then let us fight. But the devil knows what all this means." "How fine you are these days," said Nesvitsky, glancing at his new pelisse and housings. Denísov smiled, took his scented handkerchief from his sabre tasche, and held it to Nesvitsky's nose. "Can't help it. I'm going into action, perhaps, and so I shaved, brushed my teeth, and perfumed myself." Nesvitsky's imposing figure, with his Cossack in attendance, and Denísov's determination, as he flourished his sabre and shouted at the top of his voice, enabled them to get to the farther end of the bridge and halt the infantry. Nesvitsky there found the colonel to whom he was obliged to deliver the message, and having accomplished his errand, he rode back. After the way was cleared, Denísov reined up his horse at the exit of the bridge. Carelessly holding in his stallion that stood pawing with one hoof anxious to join his fellows, he gazed at the squadrons that were moving in his direction. The hoof-beats of the eager horses sounded hollow on the flooring of the bridge, and the squadrons with the officers riding in advance hastened to cross the bridge, 4 men abreast, and began to pour off from the other end of the road. The infantry, which had halted in the mud and were packing together, gazed at the neat, jaunty hussars riding by in good order, with that peculiar malevolent feeling of jealousy and scorn with which different branches of the service are apt to regard each other. "Very tidy lads, but only fit for the Podnovinskoye." "What's the use of them? They're merely for show," said another. "You infantrymen, don't kick up such a dust," jestingly shouted a hussar, whose horse playfully splattered the foot soldier with mud. "If you'd been forced to march 2 stages with a knapsack, your gold lace would be tarnished," said the infantryman, wiping the mud from his face with his sleeve. "You're not a man, but a bird, on that horse." "Well now, Zikin, if they should put you on a horse, you'd have an easy time of it. You'd make a graceful rider," jestingly remarked the corporal, aiming his jest at the lean little soldier, who was bent almost double under the weight of his knapsack. "Take a broomstick between your legs, that would be a good enough horse for you," retorted the hussar. Chapter 7